The ongoing tension between the United States and China has reached a critical juncture, with both nations at risk of descending into a full-blown trade war. Recent discussions in Beijing revealed a mix of apprehension and cautious optimism among Chinese leaders as they warn of the dire consequences a trade breakdown could bring, particularly for the Chinese economy, which is currently facing significant challenges. During a recent visit to Beijing, business leaders expressed concern over the rising tensions with the U.S. but maintained hope for a potential resolution. The current state of China's economy is precarious. Youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, the property market is in decline, and middle-class frustration is mounting. Experts note that President Xi Jinping's political vulnerability is palpable as his government grapples with these internal pressures while simultaneously navigating external threats. To counteract U.S. pressures, China is strengthening trade ties with nations in the global south, including Russia, but analysts argue that in the short term there is no viable substitute for American trade. President Donald Trump also faces considerable incentives to prevent a deterioration in U.S. China relations. His administration's focus on economic growth could be jeopardized by tariffs that stoke inflation and reduce demand for American exports. Recent weeks have seen the Trump administration escalate tariffs on Chinese goods, prompting a tit-for-tat response from Beijing. The repercussions of a prolonged trade conflict would extend beyond the two nations, affecting global supply chains and markets across Europe and Asia, which heavily rely on trade with both the U.S. and China. Despite the backdrop of escalating tensions, there are signs of potential dialogue. Both Trump and Xi are reportedly maintaining communication channels, which could serve as a platform for negotiations. During China's recent legislative meetings, the government approved modest measures aimed at boosting consumer spending and restoring confidence in the private sector. A more stable relationship with the U.S. could enable China to focus on necessary domestic reforms. Trade negotiations, however, must be time-sensitive to be effective. Historical patterns show that Beijing has a tendency to delay talks or withdraw when pressed. A proposed 6-month deadline for negotiations could exert pressure on both sides to act in good faith. If negotiations falter, the U.S. should be prepared to reinstate tariffs as a lever of accountability. A critical issue on the agenda is fentanyl trafficking, which has drawn bipartisan concern in Washington. Trump has emphasized that any substantial engagement with China must include commitments to combat this crisis, which has led to tens of thousands of overdose deaths in the U.S. The Chinese government could play a pivotal role in addressing this issue, but it must also exhibit a genuine commitment to clamp down on the production of these substances within its borders. Another pressing concern is the enforceability of trade agreements. Previous commitments made by China during Trump's first term to purchase American goods have not been met satisfactorily. For any new trade agreement to hold value, it must include clear enforcement mechanisms. To foster a conducive environment for negotiations, both sides should consider pausing any new tariffs during discussions. Continuous tariff increases contribute to market instability, creating uncertainty for businesses on both sides and forcing them to re-evaluate supply chains and investment decisions. A temporary suspension of tariff escalation could provide the necessary breathing room for meaningful negotiations. Technology restrictions have also been a focal point of U.S.-China tensions. The U.S. government has raised concerns about the export of advanced technology potentially benefiting the Chinese military. Finding a balance that protects national security while allowing for trade and investment in the tech sector is crucial. A collaborative economic dialogue could help mitigate the risk of a fragmented global trade landscape. China's ongoing overproduction of various goods has also sparked disputes with other trading partners, including the European Union. A successful U.S.-China trade agreement could alleviate some of the uncertainties and foster a more stable global economic environment. As the world's two largest economies navigate these turbulent waters, there remains a glimmer of hope. Historical precedents show that when pragmatism prevails over confrontation, progress can be made.
With both leaders facing significant domestic pressures, the coming months will be pivotal.
The potential for a meaningful trade agreement exists, but it will require both Trump and Xi to commit to a constructive dialogue that prioritizes collaboration over conflict. As uncertainties loom over the global economy, the actions taken in the near future will not only shape U.S. China relations but could also determine the trajectory of global trade dynamics for years to come. As the United States grapples with the specter of economic slowdown, the prospect of a trade deal with China has resurfaced as a potential lifeline. Analysts suggest that while such an agreement could alleviate some of the economic pressures facing America,
it may not be a panacea.
The urgency of the situation is underscored by recent developments, including a possible visit from President Donald Trump to China aimed at rekindling diplomatic discussions that could stabilize both economies.
The American economy is showing signs of strain, with rising consumer prices and a dip in employment threatening to curtail spending.
A trade pact similar to the Phase 1 agreement of 2020, which obligated China to purchase more U.S. agricultural and energy products, is viewed as a means to provide a short-term boost. A U.S.-China trade deal could alleviate inflationary pressures in the U.S. and deflationary pressures in China, noted Tan Junyu, an economist at COFACE.
It would also likely boost U.S. exports to China.
However, officials have yet to engage in formal negotiations,
leaving the path forward uncertain.
The stakes of failing to reach an agreement are high. Both nations are currently entangled in a web of tariffs and countermeasures that threaten to escalate into a broader trade war. The U.S. has already imposed a 20% tariff on certain Chinese imports, which analysts predict could shave off significant growth from China's GDP. In response, China has retaliated with tariffs on U.S. products, particularly in agriculture and energy, complicating the landscape further. Complicating matters, the recent discourse around the fentanyl crisis has emerged as a potential bargaining chip. China has indicated a willingness to cooperate on this issue, which has been a focal point of U.S. concerns, yet it warns that further U.S. tariffs could sour any goodwill.
A representative from the Chinese Foreign Ministry remarked,
"The U.S. should have said a big thank you to China for its efforts to restrict fentanyl trade instead of raising tariffs." The nuanced relationship between the fentanyl crisis and trade negotiations highlights the intertwining of economic and social issues. On a broader geopolitical scale, the dynamics of U.S.-China relations are further complicated by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Some analysts argue that a détente with China could not only alleviate economic pressures but could also pave the way for a more stable international environment that would benefit U.S. interests in Europe. The notion of leveraging cooperation with China to exert pressure on Russia has gained traction, positing that closer U.S.-China ties could yield dividends in resolving the crisis in Ukraine. As Trump prepares for potential negotiations,
the conversation is fraught with challenges.
The need for a time-bound agreement is paramount to avoid the pitfalls of protracted discussions that have historically bogged down U.S.-China relations.
Additionally, key issues such as trade commitments and technology controls will need to be addressed.
Beijing's past failures to meet commitments under previous agreements have left skepticism in Washington regarding the reliability of Chinese promises. Intriguingly, the interplay of domestic economic pressures in both nations may create a fertile ground for negotiations.
China's economic struggles, characterized by high youth unemployment and a declining property market, may compel its leadership to seek a resolution that preserves economic stability.
As U.S. public sentiment shifts toward a more isolationist stance, the urgency for both countries to find common ground could not be greater.
In conclusion, the road ahead for U.S.-China relations is fraught with complexities. But the potential for a trade deal exists.
Both sides have much to gain from constructive dialogue, not just for their own economies but for global stability as well. As the international landscape continues to shift, how these two superpowers navigate their relationship will have far-reaching implications not only for their economies but also for geopolitical dynamics worldwide. The coming months will be pivotal in determining whether pragmatism can prevail over confrontation, shaping a new chapter in U.S. China relations. In a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape, the interconnections between global powers have become increasingly complex. As international tensions rise, particularly between the U.S. and China, the implications of military support and economic alliances are drawing considerable attention. Recent developments suggest a potential shift in strategy for the United States, particularly regarding its commitments to Ukraine and its approach to China. The modernization of China's naval capabilities, reportedly aided by foreign firms, underscores the urgency for the U.S. to reassess its alliances. As highlighted in a recent article from the Washington Post, China's efforts to enhance its naval power are indicative of its broader ambitions on the global stage. The People's Liberation Army (PLA) is advancing at a pace that could outstrip U.S. military capabilities, with reports suggesting that China is producing naval vessels at a rate 5 to 6 times faster than the U.S. This rapid expansion poses a significant challenge for American defense strategies in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. The backdrop of these military dynamics is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, where a recent proposal for a 30-day ceasefire has emerged. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's acceptance of U.S. terms for a ceasefire in exchange for military assistance has sparked debates about the future of the conflict. However, with Russia's stance still uncertain, there are concerns that any pause could merely serve as a precursor to further hostilities. The U.S. faces a critical moment where its reputation as a reliable ally hangs in the balance, especially as public sentiment grows weary of prolonged foreign engagements. In a pivotal analysis, Philip Ho, president of Peace for Taiwan, argues that the U.S. must engage in a strategic détente with China to effectively navigate the complexities of the Ukraine situation. He posits that cooperation from China could play a crucial role in pressuring Russia to negotiate seriously, by fostering a constructive relationship with Beijing. The U.S. could potentially leverage its position in peace talks, ultimately benefiting Ukraine without sacrificing American interests in Asia. The intertwined nature of U.S. commitments in Europe and the Indo-Pacific complicates the narrative. Many Americans perceive a growing threat from China and advocate for a stronger focus on the Pacific, potentially at the expense of European alliances. This perspective overlooks the interconnectedness of global security, where a failure to support Ukraine could embolden adversaries and lead to broader conflicts. China's own motivations in this delicate balance cannot be ignored. Economic pressures stemming from a sluggish domestic economy and high unemployment rates have led Chinese leaders to seek improved relations with the West. The potential for a U.S. China détente reminiscent of the Cold War era could provide a pathway to mitigate tensions, as both nations navigate their respective challenges. The possibility of a collaborative approach emerges as a means to stabilize the region and address mutual security concerns. As the situation unfolds, the implications of U.S. foreign policy will resonate well beyond the borders of Ukraine or Taiwan. The ability to maintain a credible deterrent against China while ensuring the security of allies in Europe will be a defining test for American diplomacy in the coming years. The stakes are high, and the choices made today will shape the future of international relations and power dynamics. In conclusion, the interdependence of military ambitions and economic realities suggests that the U.S. must adopt a nuanced approach to its foreign policy. By considering the broader implications of its actions and seeking cooperative strategies, the United States can navigate this complex landscape. The potential for a U.S.-China détente may not only influence the outcome in Ukraine but could also redefine the nature of global alliances in a rapidly changing world. As both nations grapple with their respective challenges, the path forward will require careful diplomacy and strategic foresight.